Hello everyone, it seems that Great Britain is still under the iron fist of COVID-19. For those of you that haven't caught up on my previous videos on the subject, essentially the stats for COVID-19 are now online with the common flu. And since we don't lock down a country for the common flu, I don't see why we should keep locking down a country for this one. But you want more detail on that, I will put the links to that in the description. So why am I talking about it again, and why are we going into second lockdown? Well, let's just go through the speech from the First Minister of Wales, who is announcing the future for Wales over the next month or so.
Right, people, listen up. It's a fucking lockdown right now.
Oh, I'm sorry, I seem to have got the wrong clip there. Here's the one from the BBC.
We met again this morning, and we have now reached the difficult decision to introduce a 2-week fire break starting at 6 p.m. on Friday this week.
Yes, so if you live in Wales, from Friday of this week, you are going in what is nicely being called by the Welsh First Minister as a firebreaker. This, of course, is just a nicer way of saying
it's a fucking lockdown.
The fire break period will then include the half-term holiday and cover the weeks ending on Monday, the 9th of November.
So there you go, this is only supposed to be 2 weeks. I want you to bear in mind that the Welsh Assembly is saying that they are going into a 2-week lockdown, because in 2 weeks I can guarantee that that 2 weeks is going to go on and on and on and on, and maybe even into the new year. Who knows at this point?
This fire break is the shortest we can make it.
Them saying that this is the shortest they can do is basically an admission that they are going to extend it.
But that means that it will have to be sharp and deep in order to have the impact we need it to have on the virus.
Oh wow, the virus must be really affecting Wales badly then. I mean, I will wait until you finish until we get into that, but really, man, it sounded like most of your population's dying out. God, I hope it's alright.
Between Friday the 23rd of October and the 9th of November, everyone in Wales will be required to stay at home.
That's right, Welsh, you got to take the sheep indoors these days.
This means working from home wherever that is possible, and the only exceptions will be critical workers and jobs where working from home is simply not possible.
Well, there you go. Why they're calling it a firebreaker? Well, that's just because it sounds nicer than lockdown again. But again, that is exactly what it is. And this is all in name of the virus. So let's have a look at how the virus is affecting Wales, because it sounds like it's still an epidemic over there. So as I usually do when covering the virus, let's go through some statistics. First things first, since the government's constantly going on about cases, let's have a look at the cases. Now, for some reason, the Welsh stats in this are just, I mean, these graphs are just awful. The top one shows cumulative cases, so that doesn't give an indication of how many people have recovered or how many cases really are being made in a day, so I kind of just disregard that one. The second one, which is confirmed cases per day, that's a bit more useful. As you can see, yes, you can see the first peak is slightly small, then it flattens, and then we have a bit of a peak on the right hand side here from about September. But if you look at the testing episodes, they tend to constantly go up over time. There's quite a bit of correlation between more testing and more cases being confirmed, though testing from about September, there's clearly a lot more testing than cases being confirmed. So whether that's we're getting a lot more false positives, or whether we genuinely are having a lot more cases now, unclear at the moment, but this is just pure correlation. And you know, there's a bit more of a case maybe than I've seen elsewhere. But we don't just look at cases, because just looking at cases doesn't tell you any of the important things, such as hospitalisations, which we will get into now. And hospitalisations, as you can see on the screen here, aren't going up as much as confirmed cases, as has been the case across the world. So clearly there was a peak at the start, going way over 1,000, with the number of inpatients with confirmed cases in hospital wards. Then obviously it drops down again from mid-April, and then we start to have a little bit of a rise again from September. But again, this is nowhere near the steepness of the initial peak in March. This is a lot shorter, and we don't have enough information yet to know if we're getting close to peak or anything like that, so I'm not going to say that it's going to be a lot flatter or anything like that because we can't tell yet. But if we're basing it off other countries, it probably will be. But I do want to make the point that we're still under 500 hospitalised people, and that makes up 4% of total patients in Wales. And in the initial peak, it was at 20%. So again, we're not quite near where we were in March and April, and I don't see the need for a second lockdown yet. So let's have a look at deaths. Are deaths the reason for this? So moving on to Welsh deaths, and as you can see on screen, yeah, it really doesn't make the case at all. As you can see, again, in March and April, all deaths actually spike. You can clearly see the spike of COVID-19 deaths. You move on a bit, everything just flattens. Everything just flattens. The day before this announcement was made, 3 people died with COVID-19. And that wasn't even of COVID-19, that was just with. I mean, for all this talk from the government of flattening the curve, we've done that. Cases don't matter. If you tested people for the common cold, I'm sure you'd find bigger peaks than this. But no, for some reason, that pink line right there, that one that's completely flat, that one that's rarely going into even double digits at this point, Wales are going into their second lockdown for 2 weeks, despite that line showing that there doesn't really need to be any need for it, especially if we are trying to save lives, and even hospital beds at this point. And, well, it gets worse, because the other week, the government tried to introduce a tier system. And the idea of this was to simplify the COVID system and the lockdown systems that Boris Johnson and the government are trying to enforce. And as you can see, there are 3 tiers. It goes from lowest of tier 1 to highest of tier 3. And it ranges from tier 1 basically being very relaxed rules, rule of 6 being in place, 10 PM closing times for public houses and things like that. For tier 2, there's a bit more restrictions. You can't mix into houses. That's the main difference. So you can mix outside, but not inside other people's houses. But you can still meet as 6 in the pub. And then at tier 3, it is basically full lockdown. No household mixing whatsoever. And all public places are to be closed, unless they serve a quote-unquote substantial meal, which is pretty much every pub I've been to, so I don't really get that. And as you can see from the map, places with generally higher cases per 100,000 tend to have tighter restrictions, and those with less infections tend to be a bit more free. And as you can see at the time of this graph being taken, Manchester is about 170 cases behind Liverpool and even more behind Knowsley, and it's in tier 2. So what's been big in local Manchester news this week is Andy Burnham trying to strike a deal with Boris Johnson. Initially, this is what Andy Burnham had to say.
They are asking us to gamble our residents' jobs, homes and businesses and a large chunk of our economy on a strategy that their own experts tell them might not work.
Now you may be thinking, hey, that's pretty based, but I want you to bear in mind that this is a Labour mayor of Greater Manchester, and quite a lot of his positions are basically just defaulting against the Tories anyway. For example, back in April, he had this to say: Andy Burnham, the mayor of Greater Manchester, and Steve Rotherham, the mayor for Liverpool City region, said building cycling and walking networks in cities and boosting internet connections so that more people could work from home could form a part of our strategy to keep some of the benefits we've been experiencing, i.e. during lockdown. They also suggested a national programme to retrofit homes across the country with renewable energy technology that could help to reboot the economy and create thousands of jobs. So it's not that he was necessarily against the lockdown or that he's for the economy in any way. He's still pretty much a socialist. And he does default to Tories bad, so don't think he's based, please, because he is not.
We would never sign up for that. While this is not necessarily Greater Manchester's view, the Deputy Chief Medical Officer also told us last night that the only certain thing to work is a national lockdown.
Which Andy Burnham's probably for. Think about all the benefits, Andy, that's all you're thinking about.
But the government told us this morning it is unwilling to do that because of the damage it will do to the national economy. And yet, that is what they want to impose on the North West.
Yes, Andy, I totally agree with you. I think we should come out of lockdown, try and get that herd immunity going, still be careful in our day-to-day lives, take personal responsibility, where it is necessary and get the country and economy going again, because I really don't want to live through a second financial recession.
So that was our conclusion from the number 10 meeting this morning. They are willing to sacrifice jobs and businesses here to try and save them elsewhere.
Well, yes, but as usual with people from Labour, they don't give the full context. Now, it should have been made clear on this channel, I am obviously against lockdowns, but that isn't the idea behind what the government is doing. They are trying to only put lockdown in places where they see it as necessary, and in Manchester they see it as necessary to go into Tier 3, and there is no point damaging the economy elsewhere in the country when there is no need for a lockdown. It's not unreasonable to come to a decision like that, Andy, but accusing them of having like a hate boner for Manchester just isn't helpful, and I don't know why you'd put that in your speech. And I'm just speaking in generalities here. I am obviously still against the lockdown. I'm just pointing out that Andy Burnham kind of ruined his speech there.
Greater Manchester, the Liverpool City region and Lancashire are being set up as the canaries in the coal mine for an experimental regional lockdown strategy as an attempt to prevent the expense of what is truly needed.
As much as I enjoy the North-South divide in Britain banter, when you start trying to make it out like it's an unironic conspiracy theory, you just look mental. The only reason people like this speech and agree with it is because, a bit like Scotland, a lot of the North's identity comes from hating the South. This is essentially what the Scottish independence referendum was run on, and I do hate to see it because it is a pathetic way to argue.
The very least they should be offering the people of Greater Manchester who will be affected by these closures is a full and fair 80% furlough scheme for all affected workers, 80% income support for people who are self-employed, and a proper compensation scheme for businesses.
So there we go, he's just revealed what his actual plan is. Andy Burnham is trying to get the Gibbs. What he essentially knows is that because his party's been so pathetic at questioning the Tories, that the Tories essentially now have the power to just lock down regions in the UK. And so in this speech, he is essentially trying to lay out his position to say, we'll go in lockdown if you give me money for Gibbs. Because as we all know, democracy is just a way of bribing people for votes.
So far, they have not been prepared to offer that. Imposing damaging regional lockdowns in this way won't work. It will level down the regions and make recovery here longer and harder.
And yet you are still happy to go into Tier 3 as long as you get enough money. Don't give me this bollocks about the economy when all you are doing is going after the Gibber votes.
To those who say this is all politics, let me remind you that 10 weeks ago, myself, the 2 deputy mayors and all the leaders became the first in the country to work with the government in accepting regional restrictions, and the people here have been struggling under them ever since.
So there you go, Andy Burnham is just full of bluster at this point. Regional restrictions, totally fine, totally works, nothing wrong with that, we don't need more Gibbs for that. Oh, regional lockdowns? Nah, won't work at all. Nah, completely different set of circumstances, plus I need Gibbs if you're going to make us do it. This is so easy to see through. I don't understand how a lot of people I know like Andy Burnham and thought this speech was really good. This is so obvious to see through. I mean, obviously I can see why. They, 1, hate the South and 2, want Gibbs. So that was essentially his position last week. Let's see what's happened since then. And, well, let's see the news today. COVID. Manchester deal talks break down. Talks between the Greater Manchester and the government on the region entering Tier 3 restrictions have concluded without an agreement, the Community Secretary has said. Robert Jenrick accused Greater Manchester Mayor Andy Burnham of being unwilling to take the action needed to control the virus. Tier 3 measures are expected to be imposed on the region as a result. Local leaders had been arguing for at least £65 million in financial support. PM Boris Johnson will lead a coronavirus press conference at Downing Street later, while Health Secretary Matt Hancock will give a common statement at 7 BST. So, let's have a quick listen.
This evening, informed by the data that we've just seen, I can announce that Greater Manchester will move to the very high alert level.
Here we go, boys, right into Tier 3.
That means that pubs and bars must close unless they're serving substantial meals. Households can't mix indoors or in most outdoor settings. In some public outdoor spaces, groups must be limited to the rule of 6.
I feel like I'm back in April all over again. The amount of people who are going to follow this rules that I personally know is probably close to 0 people. I know a fair few people are already planning to break these Tier 3 rules.
And we strongly advise against travel into and out of the area.
Yeah, I don't think that's going to stop people, to be honest.
And believe me, no one wants to be putting these things into effect.
Then bloody don't.
But that's why we're also enacting a comprehensive package of support.
And my God, are there a lot of things to say on this. I will let Boris Johnson finish first, but man, there's some information that we're going to have to go through here.
The job support scheme ensures those affected by business closures are still paid. Those affected by business closures are still paid. And once you top that up with universal credit, those on low incomes will receive at least 80% of their normal income.
So there you go. There's still a bit of a furlough scheme going on. Those who need the money will get it, at least in theory. So how did these talks break down? Well, Laura Kusenberg tells us the story. This is messy. Originally, GM, meaning Greater Manchester, submitted bid for 90 million to be able to keep paying staff whose jobs on hold equivalent of furlough until end of financial year based on estimates they had done. This morning they discussed 75 million with officials. Government wanted to offer 55 million, but mood was okay, which I assume she means that the talks were still going. The PM then raised the offer to 60 million in call with Burnham, but he felt he couldn't accept it as it wouldn't be enough to pay wages of low paid at the level he had promised, so he overpromised. So Tier 3 is being imposed with no deal yet on the cash, and the final offer is likely to be under £60 million. Of course, if it was more, Andy Burnham would have been happy to take the money for the Gibbs. Government source says other local leaders in Greater Manchester were more reasonable and constructive, but Burnham was too proud to make a deal. That's what the government says, and Greater Manchester source says there was unanimity on their side and government was trying to grind us into accepting a deal that was too low. Government was worried about setting a precedent and giving more cash to Greater Manchester than any other part of the country. Bear in mind talks ongoing with other regions that could face tighter restrictions. This is not a happy episode for either side. Expect more from the Prime Minister and Burnham later. But in sum, after 10 days of talks of a kind and billions spent during this crisis, it is quite something that the deal fell over a gap of £5 million. Importantly, that figure is not disputed by either side, so amazing. In terms of public spending, 5 million is nothing. Like, Boris Johnson was even refusing to pay that, and Andy Burnham was unwilling to let it go either. It's amazing what politics has in store for us these days. And honestly, I know I go on a lot about stats, but they just debunk everything being said. There is no need for a Tier 3 restriction or lockdown in Manchester at the moment. I mean, look at this graph. Clearly, most boroughs in Manchester are way past peak. Salford having the highest peak, that was peaked before October. And then the rest of them, you know, Bolton, Rochdale, Trafford, all that, they've all gone past peak and have just passed peak. And the numbers are nothing. We're always told to flatten the curve, but there is absolutely no point trying to flatten a curve when we are past its peak. It is falling. There is no need to accelerate it when Salford is at 200 cases and falling. And even on a national level, it's stupid. The Valence graph was our worst case scenario. That is what we are preparing for. That is what we need Tier 3 for. And on a national level, the moving 7 days, I mean, all the lines, talking about cases are nowhere near the Valence graph. We are so safe from seeing anything like in April, it is ridiculous. I think there can be a safe argument made for no need for lockdown anymore, especially since we are decidedly fucking the economy over for it. And just when you think it couldn't get any worse, there's news coming out that Matt Hancock has just told Greater Manchester MPs that they're getting a £22 million package, which rounds out to about £8 per head of Mancunians. And that's it. You know, because of this, everyone in Manchester gets about £8 a head. I mean, man, I'm for universal basic income at that level. And then she was told that Tory MPs are on call, including William Ragg. I don't know who that is, and they are kicking off at the health secretary. Well, it sounds like he bloody deserves it. If we're going to get a stimulus package, let's at least try and make it somewhat effective. So that's it. People in Wales, unlucky, you are in a full lockdown. People in Manchester, unlucky, we are basically in a lockdown as well. And all for what bloody reason? Because as far as I can bloody tell, it's not because of the bloody virus. I mean, honestly, I think Trump says it well. I mean, obviously it's in context of the US, but man, you could translate this very easily to make a good message for the people in the UK. I mean, listen to this.
You know, and your state is doing great with a pandemic. They're getting tired of the pandemic, aren't they? Getting tired of the pandemic. You turn on CNN, that's all they cover. COVID, pandemic, COVID. You know why? They're trying to talk everybody out of voting. People aren't buying at CNN, you dumb bastards. They're not buying it.
Yes, I'm completely with Trump on this. We seem to have a lot of dumb bastards in charge, and in charge of the narrative, in charge of the bloody country, and just absolutely ruining everything around us. There's going to be economic collapse. I absolutely love that I'm going to live through 2 recessions. Anyway, that's everything I had for you today. So, I'm personally going to enjoy my little lockdown in Manchester. I hope you enjoy it where you are, wherever you are in the world. But, as usual, thank you very much for watching, and until next time, goodbye.